In this video, we're going to be talking about the tree anatomy. So let's first start off with the outermost layer of the tree anatomy. First, as you might already know, it's called the bark. The bark is the outermost protective coating of the tree anatomy that protects it against environmental challenges, other kinds of animals like insects, and plants that could possibly grow on it, like fungi. The next part, this yellow part over here, is called the inner bark, also known as the phloem. If you've seen our interior leaf anatomy, you would have understood what the word phloem is, but for those who didn't, let's again revisit that. So phloem is basically in the leaf, it's part of this vascular bundle which contains the phloem and the xylem. We'll get into xylem later, but the phloem is basically the one that transports glucose, or the food that the plant creates after photosynthesis, so that the plant is able to use that to survive. So this is also a very important layer. This is also used in the tree bark as well. Next is the vascular cambium. So the vascular cambium is just a separation zone between the phloem and the xylem. This is also just an extra layer of protection. So now let's move on to xylem. If you don't know what xylem is, it's basically to transport the water. So basically xylem xylem and phloem are part of the vascular bundle. Phloem is the one that transports glucose, and xylem is the one that transports water. And the water is coming from the roots, if you haven't noticed. And this is actually part of the tree. So it's very important for the xylem to move through the tree bark. Next, we're going to be identifying these two inner layers. The orange layer over here is called as the sapwood. This is basically the living part of the tree bark, and it's the growing part of the tree bark. So basically, when the tree grows, it doesn't just grow vertically, but it also grows laterally. And when growing laterally, the sapwood over here is basically comprised of a bunch of living cells that are used to grow and grow more and more until it dies. Next is the heartwood. This is the heart of the entire tree, hence the word heartwood, and this is the one that comprises of all the dead living cells. So this used to be sapwood, obviously, but eventually it grew out to an extent where now it's heartwood. All of its cells have died. So next, after that, we're going to be moving on to this last middle part over here. This is called the pith. The pith is the center of the tree and plays the role in the movement of nutrients. So older trees have very tiny pits, because as the tree goes bigger and bigger, the pit, it still remains the same size. Or sometimes what happens is that the heartwood can completely take over the pit. So eventually, to an extent, you will not be able to see the pith inside of a tree anymore. That is, depending on the tree size. So now we have to move into how we can use the tree anatomy to our advantage. So we could use the tree anatomy to our advantage in many ways. For example, historians use the tree anatomy so that they're able to figure out what exactly happened during a certain period of time. If there was damage in the tree anatomy, they could use these things called growth rings. So growth rings is basically, you see these lines over here that are covering in the sapwood and in the heartwood. Every single line represents a year that the tree was alive. It means that if there's some damage around this kind of area, it would give historians a kind of clue around what happened to, maybe around like 5 years ago, maybe some kind of fire, or maybe it went to some kind of insect infestation. Whatever that is, the tree anatomy can be used to support details from facts that could have happened in history and help them try to figure out what exactly could have happened. For example, if they were unsure if a fire happened, like let's just say 100 years ago, they weren't sure if a fire happened, they could look into very old trees and see if they were affected by fire. If they see that none of the trees were affected by or did not have any damage by any kind of fire, then they'll conclude saying that there was no fire in this area. This is a live cross section of a bark, and we have like 3 more over here. But basically, this so you might be noticing a few things. So you obviously see the outside bark around over here, but you could also see these growth lines, and you might see that there's a separate shade towards each growth line and a separate length of thickness. But you might be wondering, what do these determine? So let's look into that. So the shade depending on the shade, like if you see over here that the white areas, that represents that it's between the spring and summer areas, but the dark areas like the brown or like very brownish area, that would represent in the winter areas. And the reason we're able to determine that is based on the amount of nutrients it was able to receive. Obviously in the winter area you receive less nutrients, but in the summer area more nutrients are present. Hence you can see that the white area would obviously be the ones with more nutrients, and the brown area is the one with less nutrients, so that would tell the different shades of temperature change. And you could also see the growth, because in the light area you could obviously see it grew more compared to the darker area. Also, not just the shade, but we can also see the thickness. The thickness shows whether it has been how much amount of nutrients it receives. So you can see over here, this has more thick, but this has less thick. So more thick means that it is not able to reach as much nutrients. So this could lead scientists to believe that there must have been some kind of drought during that period, like during that 1 year. But the next year they were able to see better results. So that means that the situation must have gotten better in that area. So you can also see the center point, or the pith, is not exactly located at the center point. It's located more towards the right than over here towards the left. So this is basically, the reason why is basically because this tree must have been leaning against something, and so that the cells would be able to grow more and more, and so it could grow bigger. The more the cells collected over here than here, because it was leaning over to compensate the way the cells shifted from here to here. Okay, so you see this dark spot over here? Well, that must have meant that it must have went through some kind of damage throughout its life. So during this year, there must have been some kind of damage during the winter. Like it must have not gotten enough nutrients, or there must have been an insect infestation. It doesn't look like a fire exactly, but it must have been one of those two. So this is all about the tree anatomy and how to identify based on the growth rings, and this is also how the tree anatomy is layered. So if you're wondering, the people who study the tree anatomy, they're called dendrochronologists, and dendrochronology means that they calculate the tree ring dating in different scientific methods.